Turn it on. Turn it on. Tripping on down carousel, spacing out to the TV screen. Hello and welcome to
Good day, everyone. I'm Phil Fear, Assistant Director of Student Life and Leadership here at Metropolitan State University. Welcome to Campus Leadership Today, where we discuss the people and leadership topics important to Metro State. Today is April 1st, 2020, and joining us via Zoom is Metro alum Mark Gallagher, who will be talking to us about perseverance and his multi-decade journey of starting a college degree, recovering from a traumatic brain injury, from an accident that he was in, and then rebuilding his life and completing that degree here at Metropolitan State. Mark will give us a presentation, and then we will open it up for questions that you may have. If during Mark's presentation you have a question, please feel free to type that into the chat box. I will monitor those, and when the time comes, we'll ask those questions. Then we'll also open it up for additional questions that folks might have. In the meantime, please do be sure to keep your microphones muted during the presentation to avoid any unwanted feedback or noise. And now I'd like to give a big welcome to Mark Gallagher and turn the floor over to him. Mark, I want to thank you for joining us on Campus Leadership Today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Phil, for having me speak to your leadership group. I am going to talk to you this afternoon about having dreams. In order to achieve your dream, it helps immensely if you face the obstacles in your life, or as Randy Pausch says in his best-selling book, The Last Lecture, Your Brick Walls, with persistence, tenacity, dedication, motivation, and a never-give-up attitude. In that book, on page 79, Pausch says, brick walls are there for a reason. They give us a chance to show how badly we want something. I think dreams should be part of everyone's life. I hope all of you have dreams in your heart of what you want to do for work, what you want to become as a person, what you can do to change a certain situation for the better, or any other reason you might have to dream. You can work on achieving your dreams, whatever they may be, by applying and consistently working on those qualities I mentioned before. It is crucial to believe in your dreams, develop a strong desire to follow your dreams, and never lose sight of those dreams, even if they seem out of reach. As we all know, some dreams can be pretty elusive, but the benefit of having dreams is that all those qualities that you work so diligently on and for so long will transform you into a person with some very desirable human characteristics. I am also going to speak about how I sustained a brain injury on my 21st birthday and how I use those dynamic human qualities to achieve my dream of getting a college degree, even though it took me 41 years after I started college in 1969 to achieve that dream. I was motivated and wanted a college degree so bad, I just never gave up. I was born and raised in South St. Paul and went to kindergarten at Washington Elementary, which was 2 blocks from my house. Holy Trinity Catholic Grade School was my next educational stop, and then I was on to Archbishop Brady High School, Catholic High School, where I was in a college preparatory curriculum. Brady was in West St. Paul and is now St. Croix Lutheran High School. I started playing sports at 4 years old and spent much time in the fall playing inter-city football in South St. Paul. In the winter, I spent many, many hours learning how to play hockey and honing my skills at the hockey rink 2 blocks from my house and playing on teams in South St. Paul, in the South St. Paul feeder system right through 8th grade. I also played a lot of softball and baseball and worked on the short iron and chipping part of my golf game for many years at the same area as a hockey rink. But just imagine, if you will, every time you speak to a loved one, a friend, a coworker, an acquaintance, or just about anyone, you have to concentrate very, very hard. I have to do that every time I speak, but it wasn't always like that. I was a strong and healthy but skinny kid with glasses who did well in school and played many sports throughout my childhood and teenage years, including 3.5 years of varsity football and 4 years of varsity hockey and golf during high school. I was always motivated. One of the reasons I was able to play so intensely in all those sports throughout my young life was my dad constantly telling me to never give up and always give 110% in everything I do. He played a lot of baseball, basketball, and ran track in high school and college, so I figured he knew what he was talking about. He played baseball in the Southern Mini League, and back then it was a predecessor to today's minor leagues. And if I am correct, the next step after that was Major League Baseball. Also, during my first year of college at the University of Minnesota in the fall of 1969 and the winter of 1970, I played a regular shift on the freshman hockey team with a tough kid from White Bear Lake named Bill Butters and was coached by Herb Brooks. Brooks became the coach of the 1980 Olympic team that beat the Russians and won the gold medal. I tried out for the varsity hockey team when I was a sophomore. After spending 2 weeks doing everything to maximize my chances of making the Minnesota Gopher varsity hockey team, Coach Glenn Sonberg called me into his office and told me I did make the team. One of my dreams was to play hockey for the Golden Gophers. I played on the freshman hockey team and I wanted very greatly to play on the varsity. Some dreams are pretty elusive. I was heartbroken, to say the least, but then he said something that stays with me to this day. Mr. Sommer said, "Mark, if I had 20 players with your desire, tenacity, work ethic, and motivation and never give up attitude, the U of M hockey team would win the NCAA hockey tournament every single year." I think I floated out of his office because I felt so good after I heard what Mr. Sommer said to me. I was quite articulate in my speaking skills and had a great deal of confidence in dealing with people. I had a head full of dreams and a way to achieve those dreams by getting a college education. One of those dreams was to be a department manager in a corporation or run my own business. But on July 20th, 1972, all of those dreams were shattered. While at the University of Minnesota, I applied for and received a 2S student deferment as a freshman so I could finish my degree before doing my service during the Vietnam War. I was in a pre-business program at the U and was taking 3 accounting classes my sophomore year. Math was never a problem for me in high school, but for some reason, I just could not grasp the accounting principles. In those 3 accounting classes, I received a C, a D, and then I withdrew from the last accounting class because I was doing poorly in it and didn't want an F on my transcript. I was carrying 16 credits, which was needed to keep the 2S deferment active, but withdrawing from that class got me down to 12 credits. And because I had a low number in the draft lottery, dropping the class made me eligible for the draft and automatically got me a letter from my friendly draft board, which basically said, "Hello, Mark, you are now prime meat for Vietnam. Thank you for being such a slug." It really didn't say that, but that's what it said to me. I joined the Minnesota National Guard so I could finish school and do my service at the same time. At this time, I would like to give you a little insight on what it was like for me to survive a brain injury and how I managed my recovery. My 21st birthday should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it turned out to be the darkest. The dramatic change in my life took place on my 21st birthday in 1972. After joining the National Guard, I went to basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, then trained at Fort Rucker, Alabama as a UH-1 Huey helicopter mechanic. And about 10 months after I joined, I was at my first annual training at Camp Ripley, Minnesota. During training, another soldier and I were driving back to the Cantonment area, or our company area, at 10:15 p.m. after 4 hours of guard duty in the field. It was very dark, and we were in a Jeep with no roof. I was a passenger in the Jeep, and we both had our ponchos on and were getting soaking wet due to the very heavy rain that was coming down. We were driving the Jeep with the blackout lights on because we were in a tactical area and had to keep our light pollution to a minimum, so the illumination of the road was very, very poor. Both of us were periodically watching out our own side of the Jeep to make sure we stayed on the trail, which had a severe crown to allow moisture to run off of it. All of a sudden, the Jeep slid off the trail and into a tree. I was thrown headfirst into the tree. After realizing what had happened and how seriously hurt I was, the other soldier driving the Jeep, who was saved by the steering wheel, then ran to get some help. 4 weeks later, when I awoke from the coma I had been in, I didn't know who I was, where I was, and my head hurt like crazy. A tracheotomy was cut into my throat to help me breathe. My head was shaved, and there were 3 burr holes about the size of quarters bored into my skull to relieve the pressure that my bruised and swelling brain exerted on my skull. I basically had to restart my life at 21 years old. In the early stages of recovery, I had to learn to walk and talk all over again. So walking, talking, and chewing gum at the same time weren't even on my radar screen. I also had to relearn most of the things I had taken for granted for so many years. Things that came easy for me before I got hurt were now monumental tasks that were always challenging me. Things like learning and remembering things, reading with comprehension, just being present wherever I was, being able to focus, and especially talking, now took incredible concentration just to do them at a mediocre level. I started walking after a while, just like I had done it all my life, but being able to talk like I used to talk was quite a different story. I later found out that when I was thrown into the tree, I sustained a severe closed head injury. Most head injuries today are called traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs. I damaged my brainstem and also the part of my brain that controls my speech. In addition to that, I lost quite a bit of the coordination, dexterity, and intelligence I had been blessed with. For the remaining 3 months of my hospital stay, I took some very intense physical, occupational, and speech therapy. One day in the fall, my physical therapist felt I was ready to play some basketball. I thought, hey, that's cool. All you need is a little coordination, and I have that. They threw me the ball. I had trouble catching it, and as I bounced the basketball, I realized I could not catch the ball on the rebound. Before I got hurt, I could at least dribble a basketball, even though I didn't like to play basketball all that much. Now I couldn't even do that. Man, I thought, do I ever need a lot of help? Speech therapy at the VA was one of the toughest things I ever had to go through in my entire life. I just could not slow down my rate of speech. I did drill after drill and speech exercise after speech exercise, but still could not slow my speech down. When I was released from the VA hospital, the Minneapolis VA hospital, I thought I was doing pretty well, pretty good. I said to myself, hey, I am free. I am finally free. But a short time later, I realized, no, I am not free. All my support is back at the hospital, and my road to recovery is just beginning. There were no more physical therapists saying, come on, Mark, you can do it. Just one more step. There were no more speech therapists saying, come on, Mark, you can do it. Just one more word. I had problems whenever I spoke to anybody, and my support system at the hospital that I relied on for the past 4 months was gone. Talking to friends, family, loved ones, or strangers always gave me problems. I also had many issues with the sporting activities I used to be pretty good at, such as skating and playing hockey, throwing a football or baseball, hitting a golf ball or baseball, or just playing catch. All of those frustrations, coupled with my speech problems, happened for quite some time until they finally figured out this problem was way, way too big for me to solve by myself. That's when I decided to go to get some help. My first priority was my speech problems. I found an agency of the United Way where I could take speech therapy. At the St. Paul Rehab Center, I enrolled in a program where I took speech therapy twice a week for 4 months. That seemed to help quite a bit, but I went back there 2 years later because I was still having problems with enunciation, putting coherent sentences together because of my aphasia, and I was still talking way, way too fast. The St. Paul Rehab Center gave me the tools and then helped me gain the confidence I needed to rectify most of my speech problems. I also got in contact with a friend of a friend who was a speech pathologist for another 4 months because I needed more help. I just could not believe how fast I talked. I used to put reminders all over my house, in my car, and at my workstation to slow down. Even though I seemed to get a handle on my speech problems, there was still quite a bit of work to do before I felt comfortable talking to even one person, let alone a group of people. I talked so fast that the only person who knew what I was saying was me, and sometimes it was even hard for me to understand me. The people I was talking to would listen to me very intently, then look me square in the eye and say, what? Even to this day, that little word what really bugs me. The athletic ability I was blessed with seemed so far out of reach that I thought I would never get it back. But I hoped and prayed that someday it would magically appear. But it wasn't until I made the decision to start real slow and take baby steps, and baby steps are critical in any recovery effort, that my recovery began to show improvement. I still hoped and prayed to God that something miraculous would happen, but just by making the decision to do something about it seemed to help things along. Although my recovery was slow, my speech was fast, and it seemed as though things would never be the same. At home, when I couldn't do right away what the wonderful therapist so patiently got me to do at the hospital, my first thought was, why can't I do this? I did this before. But the same determination and tenacity that got me through all the frightening times or brick walls at the hospital finally did appear. When that happened, I wasn't going full speed, but at least I was making progress, albeit in small steps, and progress builds on progress. The recovery from a brain injury takes time. I know each person is different, but each person goes through a brief period of frustration as I did. My thought process went something like this. I did all those things before. Why can't I do them now? I started working at Deluxe Check Printers in 1974, and they had a wonderful education program that would pay for any class an employee wanted to take. It seemed tailor-made for exactly what I needed. Deluxe wouldn't allow you to overburden yourself with classes, but an employee could take one class per quarter, and Deluxe would pay for it if the employee got at least a C in the class. I needed mega help in many things and wanted to graduate from college. That was my dream. So I started taking classes to Deluxe education program. That was my ticket out of the frustration of self-doubt. If I started real slow and worked real hard, I figured that I could do it. I had kind of a 3-track mind. I wanted to get better, I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to graduate from college. It was as simple as that. When I left Deluxe in 1997, I counted all the certificates I received from the classes and seminars I had taken over the past 23 years since I was employed there, and realized I had completed 44 classes and a few seminars in that time. Those classes were all taken at St. Paul College and 916 Vocational College, which has since become Century College. Plus, I took a few speaking seminars at Deluxe when I was the United Way representative and a couple of computer classes at River Hills Community College. I took those classes at community colleges because I just could not do college level work. And I also took those classes in a way that would build on the previous class. So I was always improving myself, getting myself ready for the big step of going back to college, because that was always my dream. Ideal Printers was my next job. I started there in 1997, 6 weeks after I left Deluxe. Ideal also had an education program, but they gave the employee $200 per year instead of whatever I needed. I took 5 classes on their dime, and the final 2 classes were beginning and intermediate versions of how to write your memoir. I took those 2 classes at the gentle nudging of my wife, Kristen, who's a published author of 3 children's books. She wanted me to write the story of my recovery from my perspective, and I have a memoir ready for publication on that very subject. My second effort at getting a college degree started in the fall of 2006 at Metropolitan State University. Because I still wasn't sure of what I wanted to do when I grew up, I changed my degree plan a few times and finally settled on professional writing so I could enhance the editing, proofreading skills I developed in my 34 years of printing. It took me longer to graduate than I originally intended, but I learned quite a bit more about writing than if I would have stayed in one program. On May 6th of 2010, I graduated with a degree in professional writing, and my wife and I started a writing editing business in 2009. Nothing in the past 48 years has ever been easy, but with the persistence, tenacity, determination, and focus God blessed me with at birth, plus the patience I developed during my recovery, I achieved most of my dreams and goals. And if I can do it, I firmly believe anyone can, especially you students here, because you are just beginning your life's journey and you have developed the discipline and work ethic to do that. Getting my college degree has given me the unbridled confidence, basically to do whatever I set my mind to. And at this point in my life, I've decided to write. I started a memoir in 2005 about my recovery from the brain injury I sustained, and just finished a memoir writing class at Metro State this past December to help me finish it. My dream is to have it published in 2022, 50 years after my accident. I started volunteering at the Minneapolis VA hospital in January of 2007 and still volunteer there for 4 hours just about every Monday. Writing 52 profile articles for the Dayton's Bluff Forum and 6 articles for the South St. Paul Voice has been another part of my life, my writing life, since 2012. I've gained skill in the interviewing process because I interview each one of my article subjects and have improved my ability to write by doing that. I've been a member of the State TBI Advisory Committee since January 2017 and just resigned to give myself more time to concentrate on finishing my memoir. Thank you, Phil, for allowing me to speak to your leadership group. Thank you to all of you for your attention. I would like to leave you with suggestions that have helped me in these past 48 years since my brain injury, and I believe that will bolster your strength and self-confidence in your dreams and to help your dreams come true. Exercise every day. I seldom watch TV, but I usually exercise when I do. I stretch and lift weights every morning for about 45 minutes to an hour. Engage your brain, read, do crossword puzzles, learn a new language or skill, or take a class at a college or high school through adult education, or Metro State for that matter. Do some form of left-right exercise stimulation, walking, swimming, biking, and just even clapping. I've started playing the conga drums, and I'm playing an African djembe at the Black Sheep Coffee House in South St. Paul on Saturday afternoons in a bluegrass jam with guitars, mandolins, fiddles, and sometimes flutes. That has improved my short-term memory incredibly. Eat well. Number 5 is to be kind to each other. Help others when you can. It will do wonders for your mind and your self-esteem. And finally, pray and ask God to help you with your dreams. I would like to end this presentation by saying that when I got hurt, I did not have an advocate to work on my behalf. But I think that most, if not all, brain injured persons can arrange to get an advocate to help them in their quest for a normal life. And as Winston Churchill once said, never give up, never give up, never, never, ever give up. I'd always wanted to thank the neurosurgeon who saved my life, but every time I went to the VA to see an uncle or a friend and asked for Dr. Willis Brown, the neurosurgeon who saved my life, the person at the information desk said Dr. Brown wasn't here and didn't know where he went. My wife, Kristen, found out where Dr. Brown was working as the chief of neurology at the University of Texas in San Antonio. After some reciprocal letters and calling, which was started in the spring of 1997, we decided to go down there. In the spring of 2004, Kristen and I got some money together and decided to make the trip to San Antonio, Texas, where the Browns lived. First, we called them to tell them we would like to see them, and then when would be the best time for that to happen, which was March of 2004. Kristen made all the plans for the plane, hotel, and car, and about a week before the trip, Mrs. Brown calls and says, hey, why don't you and Kristen forget about the hotel and car and come stay with us. We'll take you anywhere you want to go. I had another dream. I wanted to shake Dr. Brown's hand and just thank him for his part in helping me to have the life I now have with my wife, Kristen, and my 3 sons, and everything else that I've experienced because of his expertise in working on my brain. I also wanted to treat Dr. and Mrs. Brown to a steak dinner, so they took Kristen and me to the best steakhouse in San Antonio. We all ordered steaks that the doctor recommended, and when the ribeye steaks came to our table, Kristen and I looked at each other in disbelief. Mrs. Brown then said, of course the steaks are huge. You're in Texas now. All in all, Kristen and I had one of the best days we could ever have wished for. And on that note, I will end my presentation.
Well, thank you, Mark. We will open it up for questions and go ahead and put those in the chat box. We'll get to those in a moment here. A great story of perseverance, Mark. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to, in some ways, the Glenn Sonmore and the positive quote, it has sort of that Rudy feel, if anybody's seen the movie Rudy, the Notre Dame guy.
That's one of our favorite movies to watch when we need a You Can't Do It movie.
Yeah, I mean, very similar. It's the idea, in Rudy, it was, if everybody had your heart, that's what I would take. And sounds like Glenn Sonmore basically said the same thing to you in hockey there. So a fantastic quote. The theme of your story, in some ways, you said it earlier, was start slow and work hard in a lot of ways as you're taking these small steps. Were you ever frustrated with the speed of your recovery?
All the time, Phil. I mean, like I said in the presentation, my recovery was slow, and my speech was fast. I thought things would never ever be the same again. And of course they aren't, because I'm a changed man and due to my circumstances, but I feel I'm blessed beyond belief to have recovered from this brain injury and things. But of course I was frustrated because I just could not do the things I used to do. I had in my head all the things I used to be able to do, like throw a football and play hockey and stick handle and shoot and throw a baseball, hit a baseball. I couldn't do those things for a long, long time. I just, but through just determination and just working through those things, it brought those things back to life again.
What did you find more difficult? You recovering from a traumatic brain injury? Was it the speech therapy more difficult? Was it the physical therapy that was more difficult? And not only difficulty, but which was more frustrating?
Well, they kind of both were, but I think I mentioned that speech therapy, my speech problems were nothing like the physical problems I encountered, and I was really frustrated. I couldn't even dribble a basketball back in '72 or '3, and I knew I could dribble a basketball because I was pretty coordinated and things, but I just my speech was so frustrating because the more I worked, it seemed the worse it got, and I just could not seem to get over the hump.
Was there a defining moment where you got over that hump?
Well, I took speech therapy at the VA hospital for 3 months after I woke from the coma, and then I realized a friend of mine, who I worked during summers at cleaning barges. He was the superintendent of the barge cleaning industry, and he was my friend. And I would go see him every once in a while and say, Dick, I just can't seem to get over the hump at Deluxe. I just can't seem to improve my lot in life. I want to get in management or training, and I just can't seem to do that. He goes, Mark, have you ever looked at your speech? I mean, he was kind of raw, but he said, your speech is probably holding you back. So that's when I started my speech therapy journey. Speech therapy at the St. Paul Rehab Center for 4 months, and then again 2 years later at the same place. And then I met a friend or knew a friend of a friend who told me that his friend or her friend was a speech pathologist, and so that has helped me. And now every so often I go back to the VA, and I've met this speech pathologist, and I just need a little tune-up because if I'm in a conversation and someone comes into the conversation out of the blue and starts talking, I will lose my track with my original conversation, and he's taught me some techniques to reel myself back in so I can continue my conversation with the original conversationalist. So that has helped me, and I'm just improving, very, 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 very minutely still. And when I was first hurt, I made big steps, but now they're little tiny mini steps, micro steps. But I feel I'm still improving myself. And the college degree at Metro State has helped immensely with my confidence level and my speaking, because I had to really show the instructors, the professors, that I could do the job. And whatever
had to get those A's.
Yeah, yeah, I guess I did.
We've got some questions and comments in the chat box. I'll get to those in just a second, but I wanted to ask one more question here before we go there. And that's on the sort of the loss of the support system. You talked just now a little bit about later on getting back into some speech therapy and going to some folks. But when you first left the hospital, if I remember right, you said that you thought things were going great, good to go, but you found out you lost the support system. The speech therapist wasn't there. The physical therapist wasn't there. For you, what kind of effect did that have? And what recommendations do you have for folks if they find themselves in a similar situation where they had a support system that was active and in place, they move on to another phase, and maybe that support system leaves?
And Phil, I'm in the brain injury. I'm a member of the brain injury, the Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance. My wife and I have been members there since 2007. I've been a speaker for them and a mentor for them and an advocate for them now. And but back then, there wasn't even a dream in somebody's eye to have something like that. And if you get a brain injury, they have the resources that can help you, and if they can't get the resources, they have resources to get the resources that can help. I mean, they have a unbelievably big network of people who can help any issue that you're dealing with, that a brain injured person or a family member who's trying to get some help for his or her son or daughter or friend or whatever the case may be. So they will answer questions from anybody.
Okay.
But
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that.
And I think to expand that out, so that if somebody's suffering from a traumatic brain injury, you've got resources there with, what was it, the Brain Injury Alliance?
The Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance.
Brain Injury Alliance. And I think expanding that out, if it's some other aspect, there are plenty of organizations out there, nonprofits, alumni associations, whatever the case might be, that might offer support to folks. Our Career Development Center, for example, here at Metro, works with alums on career development even after you've graduated. So yeah, expanding that out, search around, find those organizations that exist and those resources that do exist out there.
Yeah, the Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance has a website, Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance, and they have resources on the phone. They have resource facilitation, case managers, and they have all sorts of information to get to doctors and therapists and nurses and things. And their number is 612-378-2742. And then just go to the website, Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance, and there's a plethora of information to help you, or help anybody that needs advice or help.
612-378-2742.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go to our chat box and see what we have. We've Ada and Alicia have both said thank you, saying that your story is very motivational. Eric has asked, he said, thank you, wants to know which team you would like to play for most, between the Vikings, so football, the Vikings, hockey, the Wild, baseball, the Twins, or picking up basketball, which wasn't your favorite, but who knows, the Timberwolves.
Well, I played all those sports, and my favorite was hockey. I just loved to play hockey.
What position would you like to play most?
Even though I was kind of small, I wasn't very big. I played defense, and I played defense all through high school, all through most of my young years before I got to high school. Then in high school, I played defense for some reason, and I just played defense at the Minnesota freshman team also.
Were you a bruiser?
I think hockey was my sport.
Were you a bruiser in hockey? Were you what they call a goon, sort of?
I like to say I was more of like a Bobby Orr before Bobby Orr came in the picture, but there's no such chance I was Bobby Orr. He's a gem.
So hockey and defense on that one.
Yeah.
Alicia and Biftu also say thank you for sharing a motivational story.
Well, you're all welcome. You're all welcome.
Lababa wants to commend you, again, thank you, and commend you for your perseverance and dedication to yourself and your dream. Were there times when you wanted to give up? I'm certain there had to be. Discuss those a little bit.
Well, I can't, there were, and especially at the time when I realized I could get back in college, I thought, I've been to school for, my wife, Kristen, she encouraged me to when I met her in 1993, so I've been starting school through Deluxe, going to school, and in maybe 2006, I got let go from Ideal Printers, and I'd taken 44 classes, and I was there all at night. After working 8 to 10 hours a day, I'd go to school at St. Paul Tech or up in White Bear Lake, the Century College, or to the 916 Vocational or St. Paul Technical College, and it was a way of life for me because I just wanted a college degree so bad. I wanted to learn so bad and rebuild my life, but there were times, but not very many. I can't really recall all the time or what I was thinking, but I just it's a natural thing when things don't go your way or you can't achieve what you want to achieve. sure you're going to get down on yourself, but it didn't last very long. I always need to have a little ounce of motivation in my back pocket. That kind of gave me a shot of adrenaline, and I just kept going forward. I just didn't want to become a guy that wasn't doing it much.
Mhm.
I wanted to do stuff.
So sort of that perseverance of continuing to plug and continuing to take those small steps and moving forward.
Yeah, I guess so, Phil. I never dwelled on it. If the thought crossed my mind about quitting, I just put it out of my mind as soon as I had the chance or could do that.
Positive thoughts.
You're right.
Or take the
And
negative.
that was drilled into me as a kid by my father, who was an athlete, and he just said, "Mark, never give up, and never quit challenging yourself, and never quit things, because once you get in the habit of quitting, that's all you know how to do."
Practice, yeah. You practice positive habits, and then your habits become positive.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Amanda says she enjoyed listening to you.
Well, thank you, Amanda.
I'm curious, going through some physical therapy, but the speech therapy was really a major thing. What, or did that have any effect when you started to write your memoirs, your writing speed at all? Was your writing speed affected? Could you not type as fast as you were thinking? Did you have any trouble on the writing end of things?
Well, I took typing at St. Paul Tech in 916 vocational when I was going through all those classes, I think 4 or 5 times, and I just could not type. My fingers would not. There was a missing connection, I think, between my fingers and what I wanted to say or type. So I took these classes knowing I would fail, but I just wanted to improve my dexterity, because I knew I'd be using typing in college whenever I got back to college. I didn't know when, didn't know how, but I was going to go to college eventually, and I just wanted to be able to do more than hit one key at a time.
You talked about confidence towards the end of your presentation, and in particular, getting your degree developed a lot of confidence for you and within you. Were there any other milestones that you reached that you can think back on, and those were particularly salient milestones in terms of boosting up your confidence?
Well, I tell you, the first time I spoke in front of anybody after I got hurt, I got a chance to go to Norway with about 90 other guard members from 7 different states. We took a C-130 over to Norway. We flew up to Goose Bay, Canada, then refueled, and then flew to Oslo, Norway, and landed. Then took about 5 hours up in the mountains, northwest up into the mountains from Oslo. And there was a Catholic service there, I think, or some kind of service, and for some reason the chaplain or the priest asked me to read the gospel, and I wasn't very. This is probably about 86, 87, and so it was only 15 years post-accident. But I said sure, and I didn't realize what I was getting into. But I had a number of fellow soldiers come up to me and say, "Boy, that was," who knew my problem, because I was an airplane mechanic, aircraft mechanic, helicopter mechanic, and I had to talk to people that were above me about different things. And I a lot of time, and like I say, a lot of people listen to me very intently, and then they just shout out, "What?" And I just knew I had a problem, but I just wasn't sure how to fix it. But then again, I was in speech therapy a number of times, so I was always working on fixing it, but it just never seemed to work for me.
All right. We're going to wrap up here shortly. If you have more questions, go ahead and put them in on the chat box here. We do have one from Eric. He wants to know, you talked earlier about Herb Brooks coached you for a bit in hockey, is that correct?
Yes, on the festival.
Have you seen the movie Miracle? which is about the 1980 U.S. Olympic team? And if so, how was Kurt Russell's portrayal of the Herb Brooks that you know?
Well, my wife and I bought the movie. We watch it about once or twice a year. It's like a You Can't Do It movie. We just really to get ourselves motivated and enthused. We watched that movie along with Rudy and Remember the Titans and the basketball movie Hoosiers. That's a pretty inspiring movie. But Herb Brooks, I think, we see him do these Herbies back and forth on the hockey rink, from the red line, the goal line to the blue line, back to the red line and back, and to the other blue line and back, and then to the
Again.
Well, I think I was talking to my friend. I saw the dentist from the U, Jimmy Gambucci, who I played on the freshman team, and I hadn't seen him. I was in the class at Metro State, advanced editing class or writing class, and I mentioned my assignment for the class was to write this chapter of my memoir, and I mentioned that I play hockey for the U, and this girl goes, "Did you know Jim Gambucci?" I said, "Yeah, I do, but I haven't seen him in 40 years." Well, then I said, "Do you have a number or his email so I can get in contact with him?" Well, he's a dentist at the U of M, and I think he's a professor too, but he has his own private practice somewhere out in the western suburbs. And we met, and I called him up, and he was able to. He had a cancellation, so he was able to see me one day. We met at the McDonald's there on Dodd Road by the Mendocino Golf Course, and we talked for about an hour. And he said, I think Herbie, those Herbies are stuff of legend, and I think he started them on our team, the freshman team, because we were doing those all the time. And he said we do them because we weren't skating up to Herbie's standards, or here Herbie was mad at somebody, or Herbie just wanted to wring the last bit of sweat out of us to show Herbie to show us that Herbie's boss. So he was tough, and he wasn't very how do you say it, very talkative or conversationalist, I guess, but he was the best coach I've ever had in hockey. I played for Doug Woog for 3 years at Bantams in South St. Paul and some other great coaches, but Herbie Brooks was the best, and he still inspired me. I got his picture in various places on my computer here a couple times, and I got a picture of the hockey team and the letter he sent me down in my basement, framed by my wife, and I just really am inspired by Herb. And he gave me a letter and said, he appreciated us playing on the team that year, and we had problems with scheduling and other things, but he said, you were a great part of our team. And then the last line of his letter before he signed off says, "Don't ever let anything deter you from your graduation." And that, even though I wanted to graduate, and but that was always still a big inspirational line that led me to school.
Nice. And interesting, I find it interesting that Herb Brooks, a great motivation to you and to many others, who also had an auto accident, and that's how he passed.
Yeah.
You thankfully survived. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. Lucia says thank you for sharing your story and being an inspiration to persevere for folks.
Thank you, Lucia.
You had a couple of affirmation or things that you recommend folks do: exercise, eat well, if you're a person of faith, pray or have faith in your progress. There was one other one I think that I'm missing, or maybe two others.
Engage your brain, read, do crosswords, learn a new language or skill. And, if you're not in school, if you just got a high school diploma, just do some form of, take a class out of college or high school through adult education.
So keep working at lifelong learning.
Be a lifelong learner, which is Metro State's tagline or or whatever they call it. Their
Word, yeah. Slogan.
Yeah, slogan, yeah.
Yeah, one of the slogans. All right. Well, if there are no other questions in the chat box, and I don't think I see any others there. All right, I'll tell our listeners and viewers, we are doing a variety of workshops, at least one a week here over the next few weeks. We may have more. We'll have different speakers, different topics. This is Campus Leadership Today. So do join us, check Engage. We'll get the times and the topics and the speakers will be listed there. Come on in. They will last no more than an hour. Pop on in, get motivated, learn some leadership aspects, and then use those in your daily life. Mark Gallagher, I want to thank you for joining us on Campus Leadership Today. An inspirational story, one of perseverance, and I can't imagine what it was like having been in a 4-week coma.
Well, thank
but
you,
any-
Phil. Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Any final comments, Mark?
No, I just thoroughly enjoyed this time with you and your the fellow students here, and I wish everyone the best in their school and career when they graduate. And I'm just school has given me so much confidence to do whatever I kind of put my mind to do, and it's just really wonderful to be a part of Metro State and to volunteer for their what's that, graduate expo and other things I've done, and it's just really nice to become a part of the. I'm just really happy I'm a part of the university, an alumni of the university.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for all that you do. Thank you for joining us. Again, I'm Phil Fuhrer, Assistant Director of Student Life and Leadership Development here at Metropolitan State University. You have been watching Campus Leadership Today. Join us again. Thank you for coming.